I have played every single Zelda game that was released on console. I figured that since Breath of the Wild has been out for over a year, now is the time to rank all of the console Zeldas. I'll rank them by gameplay, historical significance, and how they hold up today. A console Zelda is a game that is part of the main Zelda timeline and is not a port or a re-release, which means that Hyrule Warriors, Master Quest, the Zelda Collection, and HD remakes aren't considered. Also, the CDI Zeldas are out of contention as well. Sorry. So without further ado, let's rank the 10 console Zeldas. Number 10, Four Swords Adventures for the Nintendo Gamecube. Now, I know what you're thinking, that this is just a port of the Game Boy Advance game, but this is actually a different game with a different storyline. You can play solo or invite 3 of your friends and their Game Boy Advance to come over and beat the final boss. This game has just enough Zelda in it to be considered part of the timeline, and in order to play it with 4 people, you need 4 Game Boys and 4 link cables. This game is fun, but it's best with multiple players, so that's why it's at the bottom of my list. Number 9, Skyward Sword for the Nintendo Wii. This Zelda could have been higher if it wasn't for those motion controls and lack of full open world exploration that the rest of the Zeldas on this list are known for. Skyward Sword has Link start at a hub called Skyloft, and then you fly to different areas of the game to complete quests. I think that the game would have been better if I could have just flied anywhere that I wanted instead of just dropping down into specific areas depending on how far I was into the game. The music and overall design of Skyward Sword just weren't enough to put it higher on my list. Number 8, Twilight Princess for the Nintendo GameCube and Wii. Twilight Princess was the first realistic looking Zelda game in the franchise. This was after Wind Waker's cell style, so it was refreshing to see what Zelda would look like if it was modeled after the games on PlayStation 2 and Xbox. While the graphics were good, the story felt a little flat. You get to turn into a wolf and fight creatures in the Dark Realm, but overall it felt like Nintendo took elements from all the Zeldas prior to Twilight Princess and slapped them all together. Even the second to last boss has Link volleying power back and forth to win the day, similar to how it was in Ocarina of Time. I've played both versions of this game, and while it looks very pretty, it just isn't my favorite Zelda. Number 7, Legend of Zelda for the Nintendo Entertainment System. The first Legend of Zelda was groundbreaking, considering it was the only Legend of Zelda we had at the time. The full open world was amazing for the era, but it just hasn't aged that well. The first Zelda tells you nothing about where to go next. Some dungeons need to be accessed by going up 3 screens, left 2, up 1, right 2. How would you know that? Well, the manual has some of that for you, but other than that, the game does nothing to guide you where you need to go, and there's no shame in using a guide for this game. While it was revolutionary, the cryptic nature of Legend of Zelda keeps it at number 7. Number 6, Zelda 2, The Adventure of Link for the Nintendo Entertainment System. Just eking out Legend of Zelda for the number 6 slot, this sequel turned the entire series on its head, and it was only the second game. Instead of the top-down action RPG of the first game, Zelda 2 included random battles and side-scrolling platform style with RPG elements. Zelda 2 would be the first to introduce magic and sword moves, which would be used in many of the later games. While Zelda 2 might feel like the worst game to some, I liked it for its originality. What I didn't like is how linear it was to make areas completely inaccessible without certain items. Miss one of the items and you'll need to retrace your steps to go get it. Also, after you die, you go back to Hyrule Castle instead of the beginning of the dungeon. Number 5, Ocarina of Time for the Nintendo 64. I really hope you guys are still watching. I know a lot of people rank this as their favorite Zelda, and while I really liked the game when it first came out, it just hasn't held up after 20 years, and I think that's in part to the Nintendo 64 controller. Seriously, go back to this game after using a modern controller and see how well it handles. The story was epic, and there were a ton of little side quests to do, and you got a horse. There was a lot of franchises that couldn't make the jump from 2D to 3D, and Ocarina of Time proved doubters at the time wrong. But it just wasn't my favorite Zelda. Number 4, Breath of the Wild for the Nintendo Wii U and Switch. With a full open world adventure reminiscent of the first Zelda, Breath of the Wild was a great choice for a launch title of the Nintendo Switch. The graphics fit with the theme of the game, and you can spend tons of hours before attempting to defeat Calamity Ganon. The reason why it's not higher on this list is because after you beat Ganon, there's really no reason to go back. Sure, there's some DLC, but Calamity Ganon was so anticlimactic. I really wish that you could continue the story as if he was defeated and complete some quests that required you to defeat him. Also, technically there were only 5 dungeons in the game, and the first 4 felt like larger shrines than anything else. I do look forward to the next Zelda knowing what they're capable of. Number 3, Wind Waker for the Nintendo Gamecube. I remember when the Gamecube was first showcased and they showed Ganon and Link fighting each other in this huge, ultra high res battle. Fans were convinced that this was the next Zelda, only to be greeted with the cel shaded graphics of Wind Waker. I personally enjoyed the game. The animations of the characters made them feel real, and it was just enjoyable to play for hours on end, and it's probably the biggest reason why I failed out of college. But the reason it isn't higher is the tedium of collecting the Triforce shards. In the GameCube version, you need to collect 8 Triforce charts, then have them deciphered by Tingle, then find the shards themselves. The HD version of this game on the Wii U would make it a bit easier, but I didn't take that into consideration while ranking the game. Number 2, Majora's Mask for the Nintendo 64. This game took everything from Ocarina of Time and made it into its own new game. The looming moon that will crash down on the town made everything much more urgent, and I really loved how you could speed up time, slow down time, or even go back in time to complete all the quests to get the different masks. And when you collected all of the masks, you got the Fierce Deity mask, which made you the ultimate fighter. I really liked that all the quests were dependent on what time it was in the game, but I didn't get how that bank guy knew how much money that I had. Did he go back in time with me? I don't know. And number 1, A Link to the Past for the Super Nintendo Entertainment System. You knew it was coming because it's the only Zelda left on the list, but A Link to the Past is my favorite Zelda of all time. I constantly go back to the game and play it over and over again. I love going to the Zora Falls and getting the flippers, the Pegasus boots are a must, and even though they don't have a lot of uses, the Bombos, Ether, and Quake medallions are a total blast to use. This is my favorite Zelda because it still controls the way that I remember it, and it still looks fantastic, and the music is some of the best in the series. Hopefully we'll see a Switch game inspired by A Link to the Past in the future. And that wraps it up for my ranking of the console Zeldas. Be on the lookout for my take on the handheld Zeldas in the future. Of course, this is my list, so I'm curious to hear what your number 1 Zelda is. Leave it down in the comments below. And if you like this video, give it a like, and if you're new here, consider subscribing for future gaming content. I'm Super Nintendo, and I'll see you next time.